African janitor, fired for helping a paralyzed beggar, but discovers he is an Arab executive and the owner of the mall. What would you do if you lost your job just for helping someone in need? Fatima, an African janitor, had spent years working tirelessly at an upscale shopping mall. She never expected that a single act of kindness, offering food to a paralyzed beggar, would cost her everything. But what she didn't know was that this man wasn't just a beggar. He was the owner of the mall, and he was testing people's kindness. This unexpected revelation would change her life forever in a way she could never imagine. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more powerful and inspiring stories. Now, let's dive into this emotional journey. African janitor, fired for helping a paralyzed beggar, but discovers he is an Arab executive and the owner of the mall. Fatima had worked at Diamond Mall for 5 years, scrubbing floors and collecting trash, while customers walked past her as if she were invisible. The luxury shopping mall was a place of wealth and excess, where designer stores and high-end restaurants catered to an elite clientele. Fatima, however, was used to hard work. She had come from Senegal in search of a better life, sending every extra dollar she earned back home to support her children. Despite the exhausting shifts, she never let her spirit break. She believed in kindness, even in a place where few seemed to notice her. That's why, when she first saw the old man in the wheelchair sitting near the entrance, she couldn't ignore him. He was there every day, motionless, his tired eyes watching the world pass by. His clothes were worn out, his hands trembling slightly, and no one paid him any attention. Fatima had seen many people struggle, but something about this man struck her deeply. He never asked for anything. He never begged. He simply sat in silence, as if waiting for something, or someone. One afternoon, as Fatima was emptying a nearby trash bin, she noticed a group of well-dressed teenagers whispering and laughing as they pointed at the old man. Her stomach tightened as she saw one of them casually knock against his wheelchair, pushing it slightly backward. The man barely reacted, but Fatima's blood boiled. "Excuse me. Show some respect," she said, stepping between them and the old man. The teenagers chuckled but walked away, uninterested in causing real trouble. Fatima sighed, turning to the man. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she noticed how piercing they were, deep and knowing, as if they held 1,000 stories. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, but said nothing. Fatima hesitated, glancing around. The mall had strict policies against engaging with loiterers, but this didn't feel right. She knew hunger when she saw it. Without thinking twice, she rushed to the staff room and grabbed the sandwich and apple she had packed for her own break. Returning quickly, she placed them in his lap. "Here, eat something." The man studied her for a moment, before taking a small bite of the sandwich. He chewed slowly, his face unreadable. But Fatima thought she saw something shift in his expression. Was it gratitude, or something else? She was about to return to work when a sharp voice behind her made her freeze. "Fatima!" Her heart sank. She turned to see Mr. Collins, her supervisor, striding toward her with a furious expression. He was a strict man who saw rules as unbreakable, and he had no patience for disobedience. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, glancing at the beggar with clear disdain. He was hungry," Fatima stammered. "I couldn't just—" "You know the rules," Collins snapped. "No engaging with vagrants, no feeding them. You work here to clean, not to hand out free meals." Fatima's hands trembled. But he's not— I don't care. You've been warned before, Collins interrupted coldly. You're fired. The words hit her like a slap. Fired? Just like that? Her chest tightened as she looked at the old man in the wheelchair, who had stopped eating and was watching the scene in complete silence. Her hands balled into fists. She had given years to this job. And now, for one simple act of kindness, it was over. Collins didn't even wait for a response. He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving her standing there, stunned. Fatima took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she wouldn't give Collins the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Instead, she turned to the old man and forced a smile, though her voice was tight when she spoke. Looks like I won't be working here anymore, she said, but I don't regret helping you. For the first time, the man's lips curved into a faint smile. You are a kind woman, he said softly, his voice rich and steady. Fatima blinked. His tone didn't match his appearance. He sounded confident, strong, almost authoritative. Before she could process it, 2 security guards approached. Ma'am, we need you to leave the premises, one of them said firmly. Fatima exhaled sharply. She had no choice. She cast one last look at the old man before grabbing her small bag and walking toward the exit. As she disappeared through the doors, the man in the wheelchair leaned back slightly, watching her go. His gaze, sharp and calculating, lingered on her for a long moment before he whispered to himself, She passed the test. Fatima walked out of the mall with her head held high, but her heart was heavy. The weight of her sudden unemployment settled on her shoulders like a crushing burden. What would she tell her children? How would she pay rent this month? She had always been careful, saving every extra dollar, but losing her job meant an uncertain future. As she stepped outside, the cold afternoon air hit her skin. She tightened her thin jacket around herself and took a deep breath. The world outside Diamond Mall continued as if nothing had happened. Cars zoomed past, shoppers strolled in and out, and no one noticed the woman whose life had just been turned upside down. She turned for one last look at the entrance. The old man in the wheelchair was still there, sitting motionless, watching her. For a brief moment, she wondered if she should go back and ask him if he had anywhere to stay. But what could she do for him now? She was jobless herself. Just as she was about to walk away, a black luxury car pulled up near the entrance. It was sleek, expensive, something that clearly belonged to one of the wealthiest visitors of the mall. Fatima barely paid attention to it. Rich people came and went all the time. But then she noticed something strange. The driver, a sharply dressed man in a black suit, stepped out and walked toward the old beggar. With a respectful nod, he leaned down and whispered something into the man's ear. And then, something she never expected happened. The old man stood up. Fatima's breath caught in her throat. He was not paralyzed. He was not a beggar. He stood tall, adjusting the sleeves of his worn-out jacket, and suddenly his entire presence changed. Gone was the hunched, frail man she had pitied. In his place was someone completely different, someone with power, confidence, and authority. People around him gasped. The same security guards who had ignored him now scrambled, eyes wide in shock. The driver handed him a coat, which he slipped on effortlessly. Fatima stood frozen on the sidewalk, her mind racing. Who was this man? Then he turned, and his sharp, knowing eyes locked onto hers. With slow, deliberate steps, he walked toward her. She wanted to move, to say something, but she was too stunned to react. When he stopped just inches away, he spoke in a calm, controlled voice. "You are the only one who stopped to help me." Fatima swallowed hard. I thought you needed it." The man gave a small nod. "Many people saw me suffering, but only you acted." He paused, his piercing gaze searching her face. "Do you know who I am?" Fatima shook her head. The man's lips curled into a knowing smile. "My name is Khalid al-Rashid. I am the owner of Diamond Mall." Fatima felt the air leave her lungs. Owner? The owner of the entire shopping mall. She stared at him, unable to process what she had just heard. Just moments ago, she had been fired for showing kindness to a man who owned the very place she had been working at for years. Khalid studied her reaction before speaking again. "You have lost your job because of me." His voice was calm, yet there was something unreadable in his tone. Fatima glanced away, shame and frustration washing over her. "It wasn't your fault. The rules here, they don't allow kindness." Khalid's jaw tightened slightly. "That is something that needs to change." Fatima didn't understand what he meant, but before she could respond, Khalid turned to his driver. "Prepare the car." Then he looked back at her. "Come with me." Fatima's heart pounded. "Where?" Khalid's expression remained unreadable. "You'll see." For a moment, Fatima hesitated. She had no reason to trust this man, no idea what he had planned, but something inside her told her this moment was bigger than she understood. With one last glance at the place she had spent years working, Fatima took a deep breath, then stepped forward. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Fatima sat in the back seat of the luxury car, her hands tightly clasped together. She had never been inside a vehicle like this before. The smooth leather seats, the quiet hum of the engine, and the faint scent of expensive cologne filled the space around her. Every part of this moment felt surreal. Khalid al-Rashid, the man she had believed to be a homeless beggar, sat beside her with an unreadable expression. His transformation from a weak and helpless old man to a poised, commanding figure still unsettled her. How could he have been sitting in that wheelchair for days, testing people? And why had she been the only one to pass his test? The car moved smoothly through the city streets, leaving Diamond Mall behind. Fatima finally found her voice. "Where are we going?" Khalid glanced at her before looking back ahead. "Somewhere we can talk properly." His answer only deepened her confusion. "I don't understand. Why are you doing this?" He studied her for a long moment before responding. "Because kindness is rare, and when I see it, I do not ignore it." Fatima looked down at her lap. She didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. She had spent years cleaning floors for people who never noticed her. Now, the most powerful man in the mall had not only noticed her, he had singled her out. The car pulled into a towering glass building, sleek and modern, the kind of place where only the wealthiest businessmen worked. Fatima's stomach twisted in nervous anticipation. The driver opened her door, and Khalid stepped out first, motioning for her to follow. She hesitated before stepping onto the polished marble sidewalk. The entrance alone looked more expensive than her entire apartment building. The receptionist immediately stood up as soon as she saw Khalid. "Mr. al-Rashid," she greeted with a respectful nod. Khalid barely acknowledged her as he led Fatima toward a private elevator. As the doors closed, she finally spoke again. "You said you were testing people. Why?" Khalid leaned against the elevator wall. Because money and power reveal who people truly are. I wanted to see how many would show kindness when there was no benefit to them. He glanced at her. Do you know how many people walked past me? Fatima swallowed. A lot. Hundreds, he corrected. Some mocked me. Others ignored me. Security tried to remove me. His expression darkened. Not a single person cared enough to ask if I needed help, except for you. The weight of his words sank in. She had never thought much about what she had done. It had been instinct, a simple act of kindness. But now, she realized how rare that must have been in a place like Diamond Mall. The elevator doors opened into a breathtaking office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Fatima's breath hitched. This wasn't just any office. It belonged to him. Khalid walked toward his desk and turned to face her. You lost your job today. She nodded, shifting uncomfortably. Yes. His gaze held hers firmly. How much were you making? Fatima hesitated. Not enough. Khalid's lips curved slightly. Then how would you like to work for me instead? Fatima blinked. What? I need people with integrity around me. People who do the right thing even when no one is watching. He leaned forward slightly. You proved today that you are that kind of person. Her mind spun. Just hours ago, she had been scrubbing floors, treated as if she didn't exist. Now, the owner of the entire mall was offering her something she didn't fully understand. What kind of job? She asked cautiously. Khalid's expression softened. A better one. For the first time since she had been fired, hope flickered in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this was the opportunity she had been waiting for all her life. Fatima stared at Khalid, trying to process his words. Just a few hours ago, she had been scrubbing floors, invisible to the world. Now, the most powerful man in the mall was offering her a job. It didn't feel real. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took a deep breath. What kind of job? She asked again, needing to be sure she had heard him correctly. Khalid leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes assessing her. A position where your kindness and integrity will be valued. You won't be cleaning floors anymore, Fatima. She swallowed hard. I don't have the education for an office job. His lips curled slightly. I didn't ask for a degree. I asked for character. He clasped his hands together. I need someone who understands struggle. Someone who sees people, not just wealth. Fatima was silent. She had spent her whole life working just to survive. Now, this man, this billionaire, was telling her that her kindness was her greatest asset. I don't understand why you're doing this, she admitted. Khalid exhaled, his gaze shifting toward the massive windows overlooking the city. Because I was once invisible too. Fatima frowned slightly. What do you mean? He turned back to her, something flickering in his eyes, something she had not expected to see. Vulnerability. I wasn't born into wealth, he said quietly. There was a time when I was nothing more than a boy struggling to survive in the streets of Abu Dhabi. I know what it feels like to be ignored, to be treated as if you don't exist. Fatima's heart clenched at his words. She had never considered the possibility that a man like Khalid al-Rashid had once known struggle. That's why I do these tests, he continued. Not for amusement, but to remind myself of where I came from, and to find people who still carry the heart I once had. She looked down, her mind racing. Was this really happening? Could she trust it? Or was this just another trick life was playing on her? Khalid seemed to sense her hesitation. I understand if this is overwhelming, he said. But let me make one thing clear. This is not charity. I am offering you an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. Fatima's breath was shallow. She thought of her children back home, of the money she needed to send them, of the years she had spent being overlooked. For once, someone was seeing her. She straightened her back, lifting her chin slightly. What exactly would my responsibilities be? Khalid's smile was subtle, but it was there. You'll be my personal assistant. Her eyebrows shot up. Personal assistant? I've never done anything like that before. You'll learn, he said simply. I don't expect perfection. I expect dedication, and I already know you have that. Fatima hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on her. This was a crossroads, a chance to leave behind the life she had always known and step into something completely unfamiliar. A risk. A chance. She exhaled and nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. Khalid's expression remained calm, but there was something almost approving in his eyes. He extended his hand. Welcome to your new life, Fatima. She reached out and shook it, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Fatima barely slept that night. Her mind raced with the weight of what had happened. Just yesterday she had been scrubbing floors, a nameless worker in a sea of people who never noticed her. Now she was about to step into a world she had never imagined. The next morning, she stood in front of the Al Rashid Corporation headquarters, gripping the strap of her worn-out purse tightly. The building was enormous, its sleek glass walls reflecting the rising sun. She had never stepped foot inside a place like this before. It felt intimidating. Taking a deep breath, she walked through the grand entrance. The moment she did, heads turned. Employees in tailored suits glanced at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to mild disapproval. Fatima wasn't dressed like them. She didn't belong here, but she kept walking. At the front desk, a polished-looking receptionist looked her up and down before forcing a professional smile. May I help you? Fatima swallowed, forcing herself to stand tall. I'm here to see Mr. Al-Rashid. He asked me to come. The receptionist arched an eyebrow, clearly doubtful, but before she could respond, a deep voice cut through the room. She's with me. Fatima turned to see Khalid Al-Rashid approaching, his presence commanding as always. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but what struck her was the way he looked at her, not with pity, not with condescension, but with purpose. The receptionist's face turned pale as she quickly nodded. Of course, sir. Right this way. Khalid led Fatima past the curious eyes of his employees, straight into a private elevator. The moment the doors closed, she exhaled, feeling the tension leave her body. I take it you're not used to this kind of attention? Khalid remarked, his voice calm. Fatima let out a small laugh. That obvious? His lips curved slightly. People always stare when they don't understand something, but they'll learn soon enough. The elevator doors opened into his office, a breathtaking space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. The sheer power of this room was overwhelming. Khalid gestured toward a chair. Sit. Fatima did as told, trying to calm her nerves. I won't lie to you, Khalid said, sitting across from her. This job will not be easy. You will be responsible for my schedule, my meetings, my travels. You'll need to learn fast. Fatima nodded. I can do that. He studied her for a long moment. I believe you can. For the next hour, Khalid explained her duties, handling calls, organizing documents, keeping his time in order. Every task felt foreign, but Fatima listened intently, determined to absorb everything. Then, he leaned back and folded his hands together. There's one more thing. Fatima's heart pounded. What is it? Khalid's expression turned serious. I need someone I can trust. She swallowed. You don't even know me. His gaze didn't waver. I know enough. Silence stretched between them. Then finally he spoke again. I have a meeting in an hour. You'll come with me. Fatima's eyes widened. Already? Khalid smirked. The best way to learn is by doing. Fatima took a deep breath. She had no idea what she was stepping into, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. Fatima sat rigidly in the black luxury car as it cruised through the city streets. The reality of her new job hadn't fully settled in, and now she was on her way to her first official meeting as Khalid al-Rashid's personal assistant. Just days ago, she was scrubbing floors, unnoticed and disregarded. Now, she was sitting beside a billionaire, heading toward an exclusive business meeting. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her mind racing with self-doubt. Would she be able to keep up? What if she embarrassed herself? Khalid must have noticed her nerves because he spoke without looking at her. Stop overthinking. Fatima turned to him, startled. I'm not... He smirked slightly. Yes, you are. She let out a small breath, looking out the tinted window. I just don't want to mess this up. Khalid's expression turned serious. You won't. And if you do, you'll learn. That's the only thing I expect from you. Fatima nodded, but remained quiet as the car pulled up to a towering glass skyscraper. The driver opened the door, and Khalid stepped out with his usual air of confidence. Fatima followed, her heartbeat thundering as they entered the extravagant building. Inside, businessmen in tailored suits and women in elegant attire moved with purpose. Fatima felt out of place, but Khalid walked beside her as if she belonged there. They were led into a private conference room where 3 men were already seated. The moment Khalid stepped in, all 3 stood to greet him with deep respect. Mr. al-Rashid, an honor to see you, one of them said, shaking his hand firmly. Khalid gave a polite nod before gesturing toward Fatima. This is Fatima, my new personal assistant. Fatima felt all eyes land on her. She swallowed, forcing herself to remain composed. One of the men raised an eyebrow. New? She learns fast, Khalid replied simply, taking a seat at the head of the table. Fatima sat beside him, trying to absorb everything. The discussion quickly launched into business negotiations, investment strategies, expansion plans, revenue projections. Most of it sounded like a foreign language to her, but she focused on Khalid's tone, his presence, how he controlled the room without raising his voice. Then, a shift happened. One of the men, a middle-aged executive with a forced smile, leaned forward. Of course, Mr. al-Rashid, our partnership would be much smoother if you were to reconsider certain conditions. Your generosity would not go unnoticed. Fatima frowned slightly. Something about his tone didn't sit right. Khalid, however, didn't blink. Are you trying to buy my cooperation? The man chuckled, but it lacked humor. No, simply a mutual benefit. Fatima's stomach twisted. She recognized this. She had seen it before. The same fake kindness she had encountered from supervisors at the mall. People who pretended to be fair, but had their own agenda. Khalid leaned back, studying the man for a long moment. Then, in a calm but firm voice, he said, "I don't do business with people who try to manipulate me." The room fell silent. The executive's forced smile faded. I didn't mean—" "You did," Khalid interrupted, standing. "And now this meeting is over." Fatima's eyes widened as the other men scrambled to protest, but Khalid was already walking toward the exit. Without thinking, she quickly followed. In the elevator, she couldn't hold back. "Why did you leave? Wouldn't it have been better to negotiate?" Khalid glanced at her. "Do you think I should have agreed?" Fatima hesitated. I don't know, but they seemed important." Khalid's expression softened slightly. "Power doesn't come from making deals with dishonest people. It comes from knowing when to walk away." She thought about that, about how she had spent years staying silent, following rules that didn't value her kindness. Maybe power wasn't about force. Maybe it was about knowing your worth. As they stepped back into the car, Khalid spoke again. "You're learning fast." Fatima smiled, a flicker of confidence settling inside her. Maybe she belonged in this world after all. Fatima sat in silence as the car moved through the city. The weight of what had just happened in the meeting still lingered in her mind. She had watched Khalid walk away from a business deal without hesitation, something she never would have imagined doing in her own life. She stole a glance at him. He sat with his usual calm, his eyes focused on something unseen. His presence was intimidating, yet oddly reassuring. After a few minutes, he finally spoke. "You're thinking about what happened." Fatima hesitated before nodding. "Yes. I've never seen someone walk away from power like that." Khalid turned slightly toward her. "Power is knowing when not to compromise your values. That man was testing me, just like I tested you." She frowned. "You tested me to see if I had kindness. He tested you to see if you had weakness?" A slight smirk tugged at Khalid's lips. "Exactly." Fatima let that settle in. The world she had stepped into was one of power, money, and influence. But even here, the rules were not so different from what she had faced at the mall. People with control trying to see how much they could take from others. The car pulled into the underground parking lot of Al Rashid Tower, Khalid's main headquarters. As soon as the doors opened, a woman in a navy blue business suit approached them. She was tall, with sharp features and an air of authority. "Mr. Al Rashid, the press conference is in 30 minutes, she said briskly. Her eyes flickered toward Fatima, evaluating her. "And the new assistant has arrived, I see." Fatima stiffened. Khalid barely reacted. "Fatima, this is Amira Khalaf, my chief operations officer." Amira didn't smile. "I hope you're ready. Working for Mr. Al Rashid is not easy." Fatima lifted her chin. "I learn fast." A flicker of amusement crossed Amira's face before she nodded. "We'll see." Khalid motioned for Fatima to follow as they walked through the private elevator into the executive floor of the building. It was grand, sleek, and intimidating. Every employee they passed bowed their heads slightly in respect toward Khalid. Fatima struggled to keep up as Amira spoke rapidly about schedules, media coverage, and investment reports. She was trying to absorb everything when Khalid suddenly stopped in front of a conference room. "You'll be sitting in on this press conference," he said. Fatima's stomach twisted. "Press conference?" Khalid nodded. "Watch. Listen. Learn." Before she could react, the doors opened and they stepped inside. Cameras flashed. Journalists murmured as Khalid took his seat at the center of the long table, microphones in front of him. Fatima sat at the edge, trying to remain invisible. The room fell silent as the press conference began. Mr. Al-Rashid, there have been rumors about your latest business decisions. Can you clarify why you walked away from the Hanford investment deal? Khalid's expression remained unreadable. Because I do not negotiate with dishonesty. A murmur spread through the reporters. Fatima held her breath. Another journalist leaned forward. Mr. Al-Rashid, there have been speculations about your recent experiment at Diamond Mall. Reports say you disguised yourself as a homeless man. Is that true? Fatima's pulse spiked. Khalid didn't flinch. It is. More murmurs. Some reporters exchanged glances. And why did you do that? One asked. Khalid's gaze was steady. Because I wanted to see who among my employees had true integrity. Fatima's breath caught in her throat. A different journalist smirked. So, you fired employees for failing your test? Khalid's voice was firm. No, but I rewarded the one who passed. For the first time, his eyes flickered toward Fatima. The cameras turned to her. Fatima's stomach dropped. She hadn't been prepared for this. A reporter leaned forward. And who is she? Khalid answered smoothly. Her name is Fatima Diop, and she is proof that character matters more than wealth. Fatima's heart pounded. She had spent her whole life being invisible. Now the world was watching her, and she had no idea what would happen next. Fatima sat frozen as dozens of eyes locked onto her. The flashes of cameras lit up her face, and her palms began to sweat. She had never been in front of a press conference before, never imagined her name would even be mentioned in a place like this. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't rich or powerful. She was just a janitor. At least, she had been until yesterday. One of the reporters spoke up, his voice sharp. Miss Diop, how does it feel to know you were part of a social experiment without knowing it? The question made her stomach twist. She glanced at Khalid, unsure of what to say. Khalid, however, remained calm. This was never about an experiment. It was a test of human decency, and Fatima was the only one who passed. The room murmured with interest. The journalist didn't back down. So, you manipulated your own employees? Khalid's jaw tightened slightly. If treating someone with kindness is manipulation, then perhaps we should all be manipulated. The reporter faltered, and the tension in the room shifted. Fatima realized she needed to speak. She cleared her throat, forcing herself to be steady. I didn't help him because I thought I was being tested. I helped him because it was the right thing to do. Silence filled the room. Then another reporter asked, And how do you feel about now working for Mr. Al-Rashid? Fatima hesitated. How did she feel? Everything had changed so fast. Her firing, Khalid's revelation, this new job that still felt like a dream. But one thing was certain. She lifted her chin. I feel like I earned it. A ripple of approval moved through the crowd. Khalid glanced at her, and for the first time, there was something almost proud in his expression. The press conference ended soon after, and as they stepped out of the room, Fatima let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Khalid walked beside her, his pace slow and deliberate. You handled that well. Fatima let out a nervous laugh. I thought I was going to pass out, he smirked. You didn't. As they entered the private elevator, Amira was waiting for them, arms crossed. Well, That was unexpected. Fatima frowned. What was? Amira tilted her head. You, holding your ground. Fatima wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a test, but she met Amira's gaze steadily. I told the truth. Amira studied her for a moment before giving a small nod. Good. The elevator doors opened into Khalid's office, and Fatima followed him inside, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Khalid gestured toward the seat across from him. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? Fatima frowned. See what? He leaned forward slightly. The world you've stepped into. It's not just business and wealth. It's power. And power always attracts scrutiny. Fatima exhaled. I never wanted power. Khalid's gaze didn't waver. Neither did I. But it found me anyway. She didn't know what to say to that. After a long pause, Khalid stood. Go home, Fatima. Rest. Tomorrow, your real training begins. Fatima stood, nodding. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Mr. Al-Rashid? He looked up. Thank you. For a moment, his expression softened. Then, just as quickly, his usual, unreadable mask returned. Don't thank me yet. Fatima walked out, her mind swirling with everything that had happened. She had stepped into a world she didn't understand, and tomorrow it would truly begin. Fatima arrived at work the next day, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Everything still felt surreal. The cameras, the attention, the power surrounding Khalid. It was a world far from her old life. Khalid wasted no time. He threw her into real tasks, giving her documents to organize, meetings to schedule, and business strategies to observe. Amira, though still skeptical, began to show her things as well. By the end of the day, Fatima was exhausted, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. She was learning, adapting, and proving herself in ways she never imagined. That evening, Khalid called her into his office. He held out an envelope. Your first paycheck. Fatima hesitated before opening it. When she saw the amount, her eyes widened. It was 10 times what she had earned as a janitor. She looked up at Khalid, stunned. This is too much. He leaned back, his gaze steady. It's what you deserve. For the first time, Fatima realized this wasn't just a job. This was a new life. A week later, Fatima stood in front of Diamond Mall, staring at the building that had once been her entire world. She stepped inside, but this time, she wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. She was in an elegant outfit, her head held high. Employees who once ignored her now looked at her with respect. Then, she saw Mr. Collins, the supervisor who had fired her. His face paled when their eyes met. Khalid, who had walked in beside her, smirked slightly. Interesting. He looks nervous. Fatima took a deep breath, walking toward Collins. He stammered, I didn't know. She gave him a calm smile. I know. And with that, she walked past him, no longer the same woman he had fired. As they stepped outside, Khalid turned to her. You could have said more. Fatima exhaled. I don't need to. I've already won. Khalid nodded, a rare smile playing on his lips. Yes, you have. Fatima looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of her past finally lift. Her journey wasn't over. It was just beginning.